Our next set of speakers is going to take us home, starting off with a really cool tool developed and going to be talked about by Bellan from our Division of Water Quality. She works in the GAMA program, and that says for groundwater ambient monitoring and assessment. Thank you. It's late in the day. I think I can even remember swamp at this point. So anyway, Bellan, thank you for coming, and have at it.
Right. Hello, everybody. You made it. You'll get a sticker. All right, so as you said, I'm Bellan. I'm a geologist for the GAMA program. GAMA stands for Groundwater Ambient Monitoring Assessment. We've been in existence since about 2000-2001, started with legislation to start a statewide comprehensive groundwater quality monitoring program in the state. We didn't have one, and we needed a baseline of water quality. We also wanted to look at any anthropogenic effects to groundwater. This is the resource used for 40% of our public water supplies, for whether you're using a public water source or a domestic well. We also wanted to look at trends, so we look at some low detections for a lot of organic chemicals. And USGS is our technical lead for this program. They work very hard on assessing the groundwater quality throughout the state. Our main goals are to improve the statewide comprehensive groundwater quality monitoring and make this information available to the public and all of our customers. So in the past, making this stuff available to the public, we worked really hard to be in person to a lot of these stakeholders throughout the state. Our study units started off, 35 of them, plus more that we're doing now. We worked hard to create a lot of reports, hard copy. We had lyris lists. We worked with our IT department. But today we actually can do a little bit better. And since we have new groundbreaking applications and tools, the staff within GAMA can create a lot of these tools that we can make for our public to access this information. And I'll be showing you some of those today. This lets us share this data really quickly with everyone throughout the state, and it gives us a lot of ways to interact with that information. So the GAMA program collects data in a lot of different ways. We have our actually own sampling, like I mentioned, with USGS. We've done sampling in the past with our own staff at the Water Board for domestic wells, and through Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories with our special studies project, where we did a lot of groundwater age dating, noble gas, and nitrate studies. We also have an information system where we bring all this data together. We bring groundwater data from the Division of Drinking Water, USGS's NWIS, Department of Water Resources, pesticide regulation, other cleanup programs and groundwater studies, and we let all of this data talk to one another so people can actually visualize this data, query it, download it, and use it for their own use. This is currently available, has been for about the past 10, 12 years, and hopefully a lot of you are familiar with the fact that you can access this groundwater data, not just from our GAMA program, but through a lot of other groundwater data systems out there. Now we have these great tools that we can use. Staff like myself can create tools. It removes the IT kind of link or that time frame that we would need. It lets the scientists that work closely with this program and its data to create the tools and keeping that message consistent throughout. This was, I think, one of the first ones created. It allows someone to go to a map of the state, click on the different study units throughout our program, the Party Basin Project, and they can see the wells that were sampled. They can get links to the reports that have been published, and they can understand how this study area kind of interacts with other boundaries in the state, like groundwater basins. This is another tool, and I'm going to show you more in real time. This lets the groundwater age dating that we did closely with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories. This is a tool that we created that lets you look at the tritium helium age dating and relative to different levels throughout the state, so you can see where that youngest water is, the tritium containing groundwater, to see where areas of recharge are higher than others. So this is a really great tool for whether it's a water district, recharge programs and projects, or simple research projects. Other data can be added to this frame, like soils data, more predicted tritium levels from different depths throughout the groundwater resource. There we go. Some other new tools would, 123 TCP trichloropropane is becoming a little bit more well-known in the news and throughout the customers, water customers in the state. This is a story map that we have developed that allows someone to go to the tool, enter in their address, and they can actually see how many wells that have been in excess of the 123 TCP MCL within 2,000 feet of their location that they've entered into the tool. So you can get an idea if you are in proximity of a known excess exceedance of TCP, especially if you're a domestic well owner. So this is a really great resource. We also have another one for nitrate. So you can go here and use that tool as well. And I believe I brought that one available. Here's the TCP tool. We can use our location here. It zooms you into the location. It adds that 2,000-foot buffer. And if there were any impacted wells in that location, it would show you what those wells were and how many there were. There's also information within the story map that tells you about 123 TCP, what chemical it is, where we find it, what its MCL, maximum contaminant level, is, and then metadata that was used for that tool. Salt and nutrient management plan, that program is using prioritized basins, much like the GAMA program throughout the state. Another web app lets you look at the status of those management plans throughout the state and links you to those reports that have been published by the regional boards. And this is something that USGS at the GAMA program has been working really hard with. And I did wanted to show you this. We have taken all of the PDFs of well completion reports in the state, and we want to digitize this information so we can now locate all of the information from the well completion reports in an attributed digitized way. And you can interact with this data to see the well completion report number, where it was located in that public land survey system. You can see when it was completed. You can see depth information about that well. And you can look at the different types of wells that are in that area. We've also have different information as you zoom in and out with this map. This shows you a heat map of where all the wells are located. And if you zoom out even more, you have a heat map with the county boundaries. So as we move along with the shallow study units with the GAMA program Party Basin Project, we'll be completing the counties as we go across the state. So we'll have these well completion reports digitized more and more as we move across the state with our program. So we're working on a few that are really neat in progress. USGS is working very hard at a trends tool. So like I mentioned, we started sampling groundwater, the beginning of 2001. And we have a lot of data, but we want to be able to look at that trends data over time. So this trends tool is going to allow users to look at trends data, look at statistically relevant trends, statistically unrelevant trends, and be able to look at our GAMA data through time. That should be coming, I would think, by fall or winter this year. And another big program that the GAMA program is kind of spearheading is the source water protection project. The source water protection kind of subject requires groundwater and surface water to talk to one another. So we want to have a data hub because this data doesn't really exist in one location online. So this data hub will bring a lot of surface water, groundwater, like surface water intakes, groundwater wells, soils information, TMDL locations, all sorts of information from Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act programs. So look for that by the end of the calendar year as well. So in conclusion, just wanted to stress that these tools, mainly from Esri, the company that produces Arcgis programs, they're a vital role to the GAMA program. It lets scientists like myself make these applications, keeping the the message intact, being able to do it in a quick manner, deliver it to our customers that need this data, and be able to improve our messaging and the communication of groundwater issues to the public.
Oh, don't leave yet. There might be questions. Any questions for Dory?
I think I have two questions. On the TCP query of the GAMA, rather than a specific site or well, can I put in municipal boundaries and still get detects of the wells around that? And then my second question, maybe the first, would be who populates the TCP data within the GAMA? Or is that all voluntary?
So the data comes from the GAMA program. Our information houses not only the GAMA program data, but other programs in the state that have groundwater quality data, like Division of Drinking Water. That query is just refreshed about quarterly. So I go in and actually update that data, so any new results come into the tool. As far as adding your own information into the tool, that capability is not here. But I can provide a download for you to where you'd have identical data to that, and you'd be able to do that on your own GIS. Or I can always speak with you personally. We can always, talk about improving the tool to do what you would like to do. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, so with that, it's our final presentation. So we are going to unveil the water quality status report. We've done this, this will be our third year that we did this. And this is essentially our best attempt to gather up partners who are telling really good stories about water quality, known trends or insights, or demonstrating good data science tools to go to places that haven't been gone before with the data and the water. And every year we expand that a little bit. So how many partners did we have this year? We had 12 partners this year. And we use the Esri Story Map. And so in a minute, I'll introduce Michelle, and she'll go through introducing the partners that are here to help tell the story. But I really love the fact that this gets bigger and better each year. We've got a drinking water story, at least one or two in there. We've got a groundwater story in there. We continue to expand this. This could even at some point include those ecological flow kind of stories, because really when you say water quality, it's really everything. It's the water resources. So we welcome people who have ideas for next year's status report. And eventually what we'd like to do is have, instead of this be just a collective lift and a let's tell a story, let's start building some systemic things. So what would be the best performance measures and outcome measures for water quality storytelling in California? So we're starting to showcase what are the options and what's the art of possible. And the goal with this project is to eventually start building some systemic things that just could tell the story along the year too. It doesn't have to be an unveiling every year. So with that, thank you teams and everyone who partnered on this, and especially to Michelle Tang, who did a lot of wrangling of people and data to make sure that this thing got in on time. So Michelle, thank you very much, and take it over.
All right, thanks, Greg. Before we start, though, I'd like to just take a minute and see if the people who are here today, the partners who contributed to the water quality status report, would you mind actually coming down and sitting in these seats, if you don't mind? I think it might be easier, and we also might have time for a quick question and answer session at the end, so it might just be easier to have everybody out here. Everybody seats? Awesome. Great, we filled it up. Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Michelle Tang. I am an environmental scientist in the Office of Information Management and Analysis at the State Water Board. And as Greg mentioned, I worked on this year's water quality status report. This is our third year doing it. We started out in 2017, and a lot has changed since then. We've learned a lot, and so I'm proud to present this year's report. So to kind of back up a little bit, what exactly is the water quality status report? Greg mentioned this already. It's really a showcase of all the different ways in which water board staff and our partners are using data, turning it into useful information, and informing decisions here at the water boards. So this year, we had a total of 12 different data visualizations or data stories that are featured in this report, all covering a range of topics which Greg just mentioned, and submitted to us or contributed by state board staff, regional board staff, and our partners, SQUIRP and SFEI. So what you see on the screen is the report. We use the Arcgis Story Maps platform, which I believe Joel Kramer and Gino, you guys gave your talk yesterday using the same thing. And it's a great interactive platform which we've used for all of the editions so far, just because it does a really great job of presenting both a narrative and data together in a really interactive, engaging way. So here's just scrolling through it. It has different panels. We have different sections on the side. It's not to advertise for Esri, just putting a plug there. It's a great platform. So for the people who attended the Data Science Symposium last year and who remember last year's report, there are some similarities and also some differences this year. We stuck with the same kind of land to sea connectivity theme this year, which just kind of looks at the watershed as a whole, like holistically. The sections in the report are broken down in terms of land, streams, lakes, and the ocean and estuarine systems. And the report itself is laid out in the way where you're kind of traveling through a watershed and discovering how inputs in different parts of that watershed can flow down and affect other parts of the watershed. So we kept that same theme this year because it worked really well last year. And another also similarity is that for each of the data visualizations that are featured in this report, and you can just scroll through it, and we'll have each one come up and talk a little bit about their own data visualization. But for each data story, data visualization, we uploaded the data sets to the Open Data Portal. So at the very end of the report, there's a section called Dive Deeper, and there's a link directly to the California Open Data Portal. And on there are all of the data sets from each of the different figures featured in the report. Or if we don't have the actual download file, there's a link to where you can actually go and get it. The differences in this year's report, as Greg mentioned, we were able to kind of expand the scope of the report to include not just surface water, but also groundwater, drinking water. And this is something that we actually really wanted to do since the first edition of the report. And so I'm really happy that we were able to bring that on. Dori, who just presented, she created an original brand new data visualization just for this. So thank you, Dori, for doing that. And then also another new addition this year is that we have a new section, which is a little different from last year, called Emerging Tools and Methods. And as the title implies, these just kind of highlight certain data visualizations or certain approaches, monitoring methods that are pretty emerging in a sense, and that could really change how we monitor our water quality in the future or how we analyze data in the future, really kind of focusing on the integration of data and making these really complex data sets more simple and easy to understand. So one of my favorite things about working on this report is just to see what people are working on, to hear about, how they created a certain data visualization and any challenges that they might have faced, because hearing from them, I learn a lot about data visualization too. It helps improve my work. I can keep current with trends and technology in the field. And it also, I like to create that dialogue because it helps promote a data culture within the organization and within government as a whole. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and start inviting each of the different, each person who contributed a data visualization or data story to this year's report, and give them maybe like 5 minutes or so just to kind of talk about whatever interests them or whatever their process for creating that data visualization, what they learned for it, or whatever else they want to talk about. So I'll go ahead and the first person's story.
Deja vu. Okay, so saying what the status of California's groundwater is kind of difficult in one data interaction, but I decided maybe one great way to show the status of groundwater quality in California was to give you the most common constituents found in exceedance in widespread areas of California, and then show you geostatistically, putting that analysis, applying it to California, where those predicted areas would be across the state. When you go to this story map, it's a slider story map, and I'll show you how that interaction works. On the left-hand pane, there is some narrative discussion about California's groundwater, who uses it, links to different sources that are mentioned. It explains the map, the shaded areas, and what is included in that map. It includes some work that the GAMA program was working on within groundwater, like the needs assessment under human right to water. It links to the GAMA program, and then other information about the Division of Drinking Water. So when you first get to the story map, you'll see this slider. It looks like nothing's here. But this slider works so you can reveal data that is going to compare to other layers that are on the map. You zoom in one level, and you can start to see more detail. Now, the geostatistics that I used in this map is empirical Bayesian kriging. It does a really good job with creating multiple models, hundreds of models at the same time, to do a better job of looking at groundwater data through the data that's been imported into the tool. So that model is fit, and an output is produced, and that's what the output is on the left-hand side. This output can look very strange in some regions because the tool is applying this model to its nearest neighbors, meaning the well locations. So as these regions are produced, the model is going to continue looking for other nearest neighbors. And a lot of times what you'll find at the edge of certain zones, because this was clipped to the state's boundary, you'll see regions like this that are going to be in error because it found maybe a couple of wells in this location, and then it kept looking for nearest neighbors to continue that prediction. So when you're doing geostatistics, there is a level of quote-unquote professional judgment that you'll apply so you can make a final judgment call on what the actual prediction should be. That is what the right-hand side is. So I tried to keep the colors consistent so you can make that comparison very easily visually. But you can see some of the green, that is going to be the arsenic. And so the prediction tool created the weird kind of blob there. And then the final blob would be the one that you see on the right. The way that these were finalized was one, to be more on the conservative side. So if there is some weird details that maybe go concave or maybe go across a region, a hydrologic region that I do not think the same hydrologic and geologic conditions exist, we would either cut that off or we would expand it into a more even oval shape. A lot of times you'll have a region be defined, and these predictions are of where that chemical is in exceedance of its MCL. A lot of times a region will be defined where I don't want to make a final region because it's either so small or included such a small number of wells that I don't feel that it meets the expectations of this map. And this map being, these are where we consistently find these chemicals above the MCL in these regions. If you zoom in again, you'll see some point data emerge. The point data being still consistent with the colors. You will see that we have nitrate, arsenic, total dissolved solids to show the salinity, uranium, 123 TCP, and perchlorate. The dots are not all of the dots that were used, all of the point data that was used in the geostatistical model, but it is showing you the exceedances within that point data that was used in the analysis. So you can kind of see that when the final areas were drawn, I tried to expand some of those areas to include some of those exceedances. You click on one of these regions, you'll get some basic statistics about that region, meaning the chemical, number of wells that were included in that analysis, its mean, medium, maximum, minimum detections, and you'll also get the same information when you click on a point. You'll get the name of that well, you'll get the average, let's scoot this over, there we go. You'll get the name of that well, this is a drinking water well, the average results, and the number of sampling results that were used to define that point. The data that was used was actually all sampling points that had at least 2 or more sampling results done for that well. So you can go in and you can investigate how those final regions were made and look and to see where those consistent exceedances for each chemical and what wells those were throughout the map. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Dora. All right, we're going to just reserve all questions for the end, and we'll have everybody up here to take your questions. So next person, Bryn.
Gotcha. So the first thing that I realized upon hearing Dory's talk is that I needed Dory at my lab because we're so far behind the curve with these visualizations that we just don't really have the capabilities in our lab. So one of the things that Michelle had asked me to speak about was what are the challenges that we face when doing data visualizations? And basically it's a skill set that needs to be fostered. And working with University of California, Davis, I don't have funding to hire a position, that can do that kind of work, but we rely pretty heavily on Michelle to help us out. And so my figures are actually quite mundane compared to a lot of what you're probably going to see today, but the message is still there. And the program we work with, the Stream Pollution Trends Program, is a statewide contaminant and toxicity monitoring program for sediments. And we have a 10-year data set, and it's a pretty spectacular data set that's pretty heavily used by a lot of different groups in the state, and it's got a lot of stories that can be mined. And I feel like with these the right kind of visualizations, I feel like it would be easier for these stories to pop out. The things that I can see in my brain, I have a hard time translating to pictures and maps and things like that. But what we did is with our toxicity work. We're looking at these sediment samples all through the state, and we're measuring these toxicity responses in organisms. And so we're working with really basic sort of blunt instruments, canary in a coal mine kind of tools. And 1 in 5 of our samples is significantly toxic. So we have dead amphipods in our samples. And these dead amphipods actually relate pretty directly to environmental impacts in the field. There's lots of studies that relate laboratory toxicity work to environmental surveys. So we know that there's impacts of beneficial uses, and it's pretty clear from our data set. And what we're doing is we're looking at trends based on land use. And so increased land uses in our watersheds, increased urban land use in our watersheds is really clearly related to increased incidence of toxicity. So I have some basic figures here that show our will this open on the right if I click on it, or is it just the way it is? It's just the way it is. So the toxicity in urban land use, when we have increased urban land use, we have increased incidences of toxicity. And a lot of the incidents of toxicity we have in the state are related to insecticides, particularly the pyrethroid insecticides, plus some more newer classes of insecticides, the neonicotinoids, phenylpyrazoles, the types of things that people are applying to the backs of their pets to control fleas and ticks. These are the things we're seeing in a lot of our urban watersheds, and we're measuring these chemicals in our spot samples at the bases of these watersheds. So increased urban land use, increased incidence of toxicity. We measure pyrethroid toxicity in terms of pyrethroid toxic units. So this is the potential of additive pyrethroids to contribute to the toxicity we're seeing. We're seeing a significant increase over the last 10 years of pyrethroid magnitude, number of detections, as well as the toxic units, measured as toxic units. So that's what the box plot is right here. And this pyrethroid use is also significantly related to the urban land use. So as you look at the land use in a watershed at a 5-kilometer scale from one of our sites, you can pretty clearly see a slow increase in these numbers of toxic units as you increase this urban land use. Spot's a really complex data set. There's a lot more analytes that we measure besides pyrethroids and fipronils. There's many layers of land use that we can examine. As I mentioned, we currently lack the expertise, but we're hoping to expand that for the future. And the way I envision this happening is much like what Greg said just a minute ago. We'd like to have this sort of just be live on a website, and as we get updates to all of these data, which are happening year-round, we could just be constantly feeding into the latest trend figures, and anybody can check the trend at any given moment on the map in their area. So based on land use, based on chemical, and based on organism.
Thank you, Brandon. Just to kind of add on to that, we are in SWAMP and in OWIMA really starting to take a crack at a lot of the spot data and creating those interactive dynamic data visualizations. So that's perhaps something that you'll see in next year's report. So the next person, I'd like to invite Dr. Dewey Tedesse.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So what I will do is I'll tell you a little bit about the data set and try to demonstrate the dashboard. So this data set was downloaded from, as she said, from Open Data Portal. We do have a large data set for toxicity. Toxicity is the primary water indicator which many water quality practitioners are using. So we do have a large data set. So I downloaded that one and put it into toxic site and not toxic site. So the data ranged from 2001 to 2018. So as you can see in this dashboard, I have to be a little bit, but I can see. So the dashboard itself is have several segments. If you see from the top, you see the various filters, starting from the matrix, organism name, programs, and so on. And what happened? Okay. And there are two maps, and there are two graphics. So whichever way you filter, you will end up having the same information. You can filter from the top rows, or you can filter from the maps and from the graphic as well. So if just for demonstration purpose, so by the way, these are about 28,000 toxicity tests throughout California, ranging from 2001 to 2018. So there are about, if you see the left hand, the California map itself, the whole thing, so all the circles you can see are about 2,800. And you can select either from the counties or the specific monitoring locations. So I'll start off with showing the first county here. So if you choose Alameda County, so these are all the monitoring locations. So I come here and magnify it so that you can see how many there are there. Okay. I don't want it to go there. Okay, here they are. These are all the monitoring locations from 2001 to 2018. So from this, if you want to select one monitoring locations, you see here, when I was choosing Alameda County, this number of the graphics have changed, if you have noticed that one. So if you want to choose one monitoring location, so you come here and list. Here you go. Now if you see here, you see this monitoring location have 88 measures. Within the circle there are slices that represent each monitoring tests. So if you pick this one, this is just one test for 2013. If you want to look at all toxic sites in this site, it is all this one. So you can see 11 of them in this one. There are tables if you want to look at it. It will give you the details of the table right there. So you see when I'm hovering, you see the survival rate, the species tested, the monitoring locations, the program who collected it, etc. So these all data sets have like around 28, 29 programs have contributed to this data set since 2001. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Dwayne. Our next, I think, okay, so one of our partners, contributors, Dr. Lansley, he wasn't able to make it today, but I encourage you to check out his data visualization. It's actually a data story on the Elk River and the adoption of the sediment TMDL in 2016. And it's a really cool data story that combines historical photographs, aerial imagery, sediment, or not sediment, land slide risk data, as well as sediment load data. And it's just a really awesome data story that I encourage you all to kind of go in and look at yourselves. Next up, we have Alicia Wenzel. Oh, and this is Lance's data story, just a preview, but here we go.
Hello, thank you for staying. So I work for the Central Valley Water Board in the SWAMP program. I don't think we need to go through that. So my data story it's a pretty simple map. My program has had a monitoring program since about 2007 where we go out each summer to monitor swimming holes and recreational rivers to look at whether it's safe for people to swim out there. We saw this as kind of a data gap for our inland water bodies. And kind of one of the things that I've heard a lot the last couple of days is, one of the problems with our data is we write reports or something like that, but knowing where it was safe to swim last summer isn't actually always useful for people. So this was an effort that we went through to just try to get our data out there much more quickly. So this is a map for the Lower American River. Let me zoom here. So for those of you that aren't local, American River flows into the Sacramento River just northwest of where we are. So we're in downtown Sacramento. Since January of 2018, we've been out monitoring weekly. at 9 sites on the Lower American River, as well as 2 sites on Steelhead Creek, which is actually a constructed channel that flows into the Sacramento just upstream. And there's been a lot of focus recently because of some trash and debris cleanup efforts. I can't take credit for this. I was lucky to have some really fantastic scientific aides. That's how we've been able to do this, who've since moved on to new opportunities. So they kind of figured out how we could come up with a system so that we could easily input our data and have it show up on this map. So we had crews out sampling this morning. So those samples would be processed in our lab this afternoon, and the new results will be posted on the map tomorrow afternoon. So the colors on the map are kind of reflective of the statewide bacteria objectives. So sites in green are currently meeting the objectives. Sites in yellow mean the average concentration is above the geometric mean concentration of 100. And then sites in red are above the 320 statistical threshold value. So you can see, for instance, Discovery Park, which is a very popular park just up here, is currently red from our data last week. So if you click on one of the sites, you get this pop-up window so you can see a photo of the site, get more information. It'll tell you what the most recent result was, so that was 816. And if you scroll down, you can also see results from the last 4 weeks. And click on a link that will take you to kind of a summary spreadsheet if you want to look at all of the data we've collected since January of 2018. Like I said, it's a pretty simple but effective way for us to get our data out to the public and local agencies. We've also started doing this for some other watersheds where we're monitoring this summer. So if you go to our Central Valley Swamp website, you can look up data for stocked and urban waterways, as well as some upper portions of the San Joaquin River that are being monitored by our Fresno office.
All right, thank you, Alicia. Next up, we have Dr. Keith Bama-Gregson.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Yes, so my name's Keith, and I talked a little bit about freshwater harmful algal blooms yesterday, and I actually mentioned this map here. And so in 2016, the Water Board started a database where people could report blooms across the state, and we would start to collate and collect that data. And these are all voluntary reports, so some of them might be a person in the public who might see some green water and not be really sure what's going on there. Others are with partner agencies that have formal monitoring programs, and so they're contributing data to this. And then other data comes from water board staff and regional board staff who are responding to some of those bloom incidents themselves. And so, there we go. Yeah, it's a tableau. Yeah, so this, so each dot here shows a bloom report, and then they're color coded by the time at which that report was submitted. And so the brighter orange colors indicate reports that were recently submitted. And so you could basically look, and if you were interested in going to a particular water body and want to know if it was safe to swim there in terms of harmful algal blooms, you could see if your water body was listed here on this map, and if so, when that report was last filed. Here. Great, perfect. This is what I was looking for. So then if you hover over it, you then get the bloom report that was that's in the database. And so this shows the latitude and longitude of the bloom, the county, the type of water body, and then there's a narrative in there where our staff has basically typed up what we noticed. And so this is actually a bloom at Horseshoe Lake up in Chico that we had regional board staff out there earlier, or at the end of last week sampling, and we did detect toxins on it, and they were moderately high. They triggered our second level of warning. And so here you can kind of read about the history of reports and information there. And this data is also on the Open Data Portal, so you can also download it as a CSV file. And so one of the goals we have is to try and increase the number of partners. And so we've seen that over the last couple of years. We've seen more and more people contributing reports to this. And as the word has spread about it, we try to get this information out to the media and to the public that they can submit their information here. So it's been a great way for us to start to understand where and when the blooms are happening in California. That's it.
Great, thank you, Keith. Up next, we have Dr. Jay Davis.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks to all of you for sticking around to get your stickers. I'm the lead scientist for the swamp bioaccumulation monitoring element, and the main thing we do is monitor contaminants in fish across California. Turning data into information is one of the themes of this meeting year after year, and Laurel Firestone made a pitch for the importance of risk communication, the fact that information is power. Information empowers managers and the public to protect the environment and public health. But we tend to focus overall more on the data and generation and data side of things rather than the information side. So I wanted to do a little data story that highlights fish consumption advisories in the state. And I think they're a shining example of information that's generated to serve that role for risk communication. So the data story summarizes the whole process of generating the data and turning that into information on fish contamination. Starting with the planning process, where the water boards, US EPA, and the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and as well as scientific organizations get together to plan how we spend the funds that we have for monitoring contaminants in fish. We've got plans for monitoring all of the major water body types in California. This map here shows a plan for long-term monitoring of mercury in lakes across the state. But we also monitor the coast and rivers and streams. Overall, we have a plan of revisiting these water bodies to meet the swamp goal of providing timely, high-quality information on water quality throughout the state. One of the important parts of this process in the planning stage is we get detailed input from OEHA on the data that they need to expand and update the fish consumption advisory. So they're really great partners in this. They give us really detailed input on a water body specific basis, exactly what species they need and how many fish from each species. The next step is that we go fishing. We collect thousands of fish every year. In 2017, we collected about 2,000 fish, for example. We sample more than 40 water bodies per year. Overall, the fishing team spends months out across the state from April through October, hours and hours and hours of fishing. So that's a huge effort. Then the next step is processing all the samples, the dissection and coordination with labs, and then the chemical analysis. We analyze mercury and PCBs and a few other chemicals. Overall, there are 90 different parameters. Quality assurance is a high priority, so the SWAMP goal of high quality information, and we take that very seriously, and have rigorous QA. Then the next step is managing and reporting the data, and we do this, we try to do this in a very prompt way, and we have a group, the Bioaccumulation Oversight Group, that does a review, a peer review of the data set each year, and then we've come up with an expedited way of getting the data onto the open data portal, into CDN, And then also we have the Safe to Eat portal that's part of the My Water Quality website for the Monitoring Council. One of the things we did this year with the portal was we revised it, and one of the reasons I'm highlighting fish advisories is that we revised the portal to have a greater focus on the fish consumption advisories, because the advisories are really the key information that we want the public, if they look at anything, we want to make sure they look at the advisories and know how to make choices about what fish they consume from California water bodies. So it's quite a challenging task to distill this information into clear advice for the public. It's a very complex data set and a complex message that needs to be communicated. We've got a variety of species that have different patterns of accumulation. Some accumulate mercury, for example, a lot more than others. We've got a host of chemicals, and there's a need to take the information on all the chemicals and come up with an overall sort of statement on the relative risk of consuming one species or another. We've got concentrations that vary from one location to another. There's the toxicology information that's, the literature on that is constantly evolving, and it's another complex part of this that OEHA sort of interprets all of that and applies it to our data. There are different populations. Different parts of the human population have different sensitivity. So the fetus and young children are most sensitive to the developmental toxicity of mercury and PCBs. Lower IQ is one of the main outcomes if you have excessive exposure. So pregnant women and young children are the most sensitive population, and then males, adult males, and women beyond childbearing age are a less sensitive population. And then there are health benefits of consuming fish. Omega-3 fatty acids, you've probably all heard of. They're very beneficial to your health. The levels of these fatty acids vary from one species to another. So there's a lot of information to all pull together and try to communicate, and then it's a tricky message to communicate of wanting to encourage fish consumption, because consuming fish is a great source of nutrition, and there are significant health benefits, but you want to steer people away from consuming the fish with high contaminant concentrations. So you don't want to scare people away from eating fish entirely. You actually want to just help them make smart choices. But OEHA are experts at this, and they've been working at this for a long time, and they've been getting better and better at it. Overall, they've issued 110 advisories for specific water bodies across the state, as well as general advisories for where they're for water bodies that don't have site-specific advice. There's a general advisory for lakes, and there's a general statewide advisory for the coast. So the ultimate information product are these advisory posters. Aaron Hester showed this earlier. And these posters, I think, are really an elegant way of displaying this complex information. They've been refined over time. I'm not going to go through the details of it, given time constraints, but they've honed this message I've been partnering with OEHA on different studies for over 20 years, and I've seen these posters evolve and get better and better. One of the key things is that they actually test the information product with the audience. I think that's really a key to successful communication of information. There have been focus groups over the years that they've worked with to hone this message, and they've tested the message with different ethnic communities. Fish consumption is an area where these sort of racial considerations, environmental justice considerations are very important, and over the past, over the years, that kind of input has been part of the history of developing these posters. So with this data story, I wanted to focus attention on this highly evolved form of risk communication and the process that supports it, and that's my story.
Right, thank you, Jay. Quick question, is Peter in the audience? There you go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter. I work with Swamp IQ. Originally, when I came up with this storyboard, it was to champion the Esri product as sort of a PowerPoint on steroids. But judging from today's content, I don't really need to do that. But I had to tell a story, and in December, I had gone on a Blitz, which is a volunteer science effort where people get together and go collect as much data as they can. This was put on by Cal eDNA down in UCLA, and we were not only collecting iNaturalist data, but we were also going to collect eDNA samples. So normally on these BioBlitzes, you go out and take photographs of what you see, and they have great data sets that pop up from all over the country. So we went down to Santa Cruz to the Younger Lagoon because Cal eDNA does, they like to focus on unique natural areas. So the Younger Lagoon is certainly one of them. And one of the great things that the Esri product can do is sort of give you a better view of what's going on in the area you're trying to show, so you can move around in here and really explore the area. You can also do great things, inserting different data and links into your story like that. So we did that, and I go on to explain about the process, how they process eDNA down at the UCLA campus. And I did that by embedding a bunch of videos, a video playlist of exactly how they do that. And then they put up their data. This is a very useful data set with all the taxa and everything you can find out there. And I encourage you to explore this because it says a lot more than I'm telling you today. And with those data sets, a lot of people don't think they're robust, but they are getting more robust all the time. And our data science is happening outside of government and outside of academia. I can easily download a script that allowed me to check out mayfly data. I was just interested, hey, why do they call them mayflies? Sure enough, with about 20 lines of script, I was able to plot the months they came. Month number 5, that's May. And also, then quickly with the CSV file that it generated, I was able to make a quick map to show where and what month they popped up. So I really think that volunteer data science is being refined and improved all the time. Places like the Dataverse project and our Open Science are doing a lot of great work with the R community, creating software and tools. And I feel that we need to, if we're going to grow as scientists, we need to grow the community and look outside the normal places we would normally be. So, thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Peter. So we have 2 more data visualizations, so thank you everybody for sticking it out towards the end. And for you, our enthusiasts, our last 2 data visualizations are our Shiny apps. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and invite David Altair.
While that's loading, before I get started, I did want to give credit to the San Diego Coastkeeper who came up with the conceptual idea for this tool. So really what I did is just kind of took their idea and implemented it in R and the Shiny package, as Michelle mentioned. So what it is an online tool, and the intent is to summarize industrial stormwater effluent data that gets reported to us here at the State Board, and then to look at that kind of in combination with some other indicators of impairment and pollution burden. So if you just come to the landing page, there's a bit of a background and some instructions on how to use the tool, but I'll just jump in to the kind of the main part of the tool is this WQI scores tab. So the tool pulls in data, kind of a more or less direct connection to the stormwater monitoring data on our open data portal, which comes from the SMARTS database, if you're familiar with that. So then if you look at the map, you can see if you just look at each point, everyone is an individual industrial site, and then the coloration is it indicates a water quality index score, which we've calculated. I'll go into a little bit more on that, but basically green is good and red is poor score. So what the score itself is from it's based on the Canadian the Canadian Water Quality Index score. You can see, so here's a little bit more information on how the calculation works, but essentially it just takes into account the frequency and the magnitude of times when sampling data is above certain thresholds. So the tool allows users to use some predefined thresholds or enter their own standards, and these can all be customized. You can kind of inspect the data and download it as you'd like. So then back onto the map, those scores get translated onto the map, and you can check out any individual site, get some more information about the site itself, and about how the score was calculated. So for instance, in this case, you can see what parameters were included at this site, and then some information about the frequency and magnitude of exceedance and the overall score. So then the other parts of this map show things like the blue lines are 303D listed water bodies, and the colored polygons come from the CalEnviro screen work that was done by WEHA that kind of integrates a lot of different indicators of impairment and pollution burden for a particular census tract. So then with the kind of the selectors on the left here, you can sort of filter out what kind of data you'd like to show. You can select what sort of standard you'd like to apply, whether you want to use, for instance, the California Toxic Rule standards, the numeric action levels, or your custom standards. You can select what monitoring period you'd like to apply the data to, and then you can start to do a little bit of selection to do things like maybe just looking at sites that have, say, poor water quality index scores. And you can start to filter on things like those CalEnviro screen polygons. So in this case, high scores indicate poor quality. So you might want to look at sites that have low WQI scores that also fall in polygons with poor CES scores. And then you could even do things like filtering by sites that are within a certain distance of 303D listed water bodies. So kind of the point here is that it gives a way to summarize the data kind of relatively quickly. It gives sort of a direct connection to the data, so it's kind of near real time in terms of the monitoring data that you're looking at. And it could also potentially be used for things like informing our monitoring and inspection programs to do maybe targeted enforcement of sites that have poor water quality, and maybe you can maybe look and see what sites are having kind of an outsized impact on the public health conditions or the ambient environmental quality. So I think that's just about it. I will mention that you can download the data through the tool as well, and all of the data sources are listed here, and since it is written in R, the code is available through GitHub. So I think that's it.
All right, thank you, David. And last but not least, we have Dr. Marcus Beck, who gave a great talk yesterday, a great presentation yesterday. And he's another total whiz at R, so it's great to hear him talk about data visualization. Let me relive this for you.
All right, so after seeing that last talk, I'm really glad we recently changed the name from the WQI to the SQI, so as to avoid confusion with other indices. So thank you. As Michelle mentioned, yesterday I gave a much extended, longer talk about this, where I was talking about the bigger conceptual foundation for this, and that was great. I enjoy giving those types of talks, but I'm really more excited talking about these types of dashboards. And I'm totally biased because I made this, but I think this is like a really interesting way to sort of not only address some of these large-scale issues about how do you synthesize data, but also just putting the data in the hands of the people that are actually going to use it to make decisions. So I'll give you the, I guess, the 30-second elevator speech about what this tool is all about. For those of you that weren't here yesterday, this is the Stream Quality Index. It's an index on top of other indices, so why would we want to do that? Well, first and foremost, it's a communication tool. This is something that was developed for the Southern California Stormwater Monitoring Coalition, which is a collection of folks in Southern California of regulated parties, regulators, consultant groups, anybody that's really concerned with stormwater management down there. And they collectively monitor thousands of sites, wadable streams down there, where they're basically collecting information on the chemical parameters, physical habitat, and biological response indicators as well. And so they have all these different lines of evidence that they need to sort of understand and synthesize in a way to sort of not just look at one thing at a time, but look at collectively what all those multiple lines of evidence are really telling them about the condition of their sites. So that's really what we did with this SQI. We gave them a way to sort of look at all of those three things in a way that was actually interpretable down to these sort of meaningful categories of whether something was healthy and unimpacted or unhealthy and stressed, and every combination in between. So when you go to this website, pardon me, you get on this landing page here, and you kind of, this is sort of an overview map of everything that's going on, big picture information. You get a sort of description of what the index is all about, what it's trying to do. And just sort of in a nutshell, we're actually using just the biological indicators as our response endpoint, and modeling the likelihood of seeing an altered biological community as a function of the stressors we're seeing there, where the stressors are related to water chemistry and physical habitat. And so what you get with the SQI score is this sort of actionable narrative category of whether the biology is healthy or impacted, and whether the condition is stressed or unstressed given the stressor or the chemical and physical habitat that's observed at a site. And so a site could fall into one of these 4 categories. Healthy and unstressed would be the ideal scenario. Impacted and stressed would be the less than ideal scenario. But we also have these sort of oddball categories where we have, as is common with multiple lines of evidence, you can have conflicting information. So we have sites that fall into this category where the biology is healthy. In other words, the bugs are good, the algae is good, but the stressors are relatively high. And so this is what we're calling a healthy and resilient community. So that's a category a site could fall in. The converse of that is where we have a site where the biology is not so great, but the stressors that we've looked at, the water chemistry and the physical habitat, they're not a likely problem that's affecting the biology. So those are pretty low stressors. And so this is a site that's impacted by an unknown stress. And essentially, these categories are, just sort of high-level pieces of information that you can get a, first cut of what's going on with the biology, what's going on through stressors, and then if you need to take a deeper dive, then you look at the underlying data, do some follow-up analyses, and sort of really figure out what's going on. So that's the foundation of the index. And you'll see from the map, a lot of red. This is Southern California, so not a huge surprise. But you can see sort of the lay of the land, how the sites fall out. This is right now showing the overall SQI categories. You can toggle it to show, right now again it's showing the overall, but you can also show the biological condition. This is sort of a second layer down, what's happening with the biology. So this is showing you what's going on with the bugs, what's going on with the algae. Are both of those communities good? Are both of those communities bad? Is one of those impacted but not the other? So you can get a sense of what's going on there. And then with the stressor condition, this is going to show you what's going on with the water chemistry and the physical habitat. So here we have, again, these sort of high-level categories of low stressors across the board in green, high stressors across the board in red, and then every combination in between of stress, like only chemistry, only habitat, or low levels of both, because the way we've designed it is sort of additive based on that. So that's great. That's a high-level thing that you can look at on the map. But where it gets, I think, really cool is I'm just going to pick something. Let's look at this site. So you click a site, and now it's selected. It says, this is my site number, this is the year it was sampled, this is the stream reach it's on. We can go to this Scores tab and see some output for that. I'm actually going to zoom this out so you can see all the pieces of information. But basically, these 3 categories here, these are the 3 SQI tallies or pieces of information you get out of this index for that site. So here's the overall condition. This is a site that's impacted by an unknown stress. So the biology is not so great. In other words, the bugs are not doing so great. So this says it's impacted for the CSCI. This is our California Stream Condition Index that looks at the macroinverts. But the stressors that are there, it's in a low stress condition. So the water chemistry we've looked at this site, the physical habitat, all those things are good based on what our models are telling us. So this is kind of an interesting case where when we look at all the pieces of information going into this site, we can get a bigger picture of what's going on as opposed to just, let me just look at the bugs, or let me just look at the algae, let me just look at the chemistry. So it's sort of putting all those things together to get a higher level picture of what's going on. I know this is terribly difficult to see, but a really cool feature of this down here, this is something that was added really recently. We actually, this piece down here adds some context to these scores. And a common critique we got from this index and a lot of indices in Southern California is that, well, everything's red. What do we do with that? Well, we can sort of give you some idea of how red are you or how green are you based on a context of what an expected biological condition could be as a function of the landscape that's around there. And so we have, if you were here last year, I gave another talk about another visualization tool called Scape that provides that context. It models a range of CSCI scores that you would expect as a function of the landscape. And so that's what this plot is showing you down here. So you can see that line. That's the range of expected scores you get for this location. And this point is the observed CSCI score. And this is actually not a really good example because the observed score is within the range of expectations, but we do have some examples, let me see if I can find one, where the score is outside of that expected range. And let me see, it's got to be one. There's one. Yeah, so this is an overscoring site based on the expectations. So now we know that there's maybe something going on here because this site is doing way better than what the landscape should be doing to the biological community. And so, long story short, this is just a way to add context to those scores. It's just another layer of information that sort of cross-cuts across these different products that we've developed to help interpret the indices. So this is the high-level picture. You get the overall SQI, the biological score, and then the stressors that are affecting an individual site. Now, even though this is a communication tool that's meant to be sort of high level and telling you what's going on, we wanted to actually preserve the underlying data and provide access to that information if someone wanted to do a deeper dive to see what's going on. So if you click on the Details tab, you get these gauges that really show you all of the components that are going into the SQI. There is an empirical model underneath the hood that relates biological response to the stressors, and the raw data that goes into that is available. So we have the CSCI score for the bugs, the ASCI score for the algae, the water chemistry parameters, the physical habitat, supplementary components for the physical habitat indices as additional information, and so on and so forth. And so we designed this in a way to be like, you know, you look at this quickly, you see colors and sort of things jump out. Some things are red, some things are green. And it's just sort of a way to do a quick assessment of which things of all of the component pieces going into this index could be the thing that's driving the stress. Maybe it's nitrogen, or maybe it's only phosphorus that's, you know, affecting the water chemistry that is then affecting the biology. So this gives you the ability to do that in a sense. And then the last piece of information is this tab called Relative Details. So that last tab was just details. These are now relative details where, again, this is the data for that particular site. These lines are the values for the multiple indices going into the SQI for that site. But now instead of just the observed values, you see where those observed values are relative to the rest of the sites in this population of sites. So we can see that, okay, this site, CSCI is not great. It's actually in the 37th percentile of CSCI scores for the entire region. So now you can actually look at it and say, well, might not be great, but how great is it compared to everything else? So this is just another sort of way to think about comparisons. And then one last thing about this, you can actually filter these by different regions. So here's SMC, Stormwater Monitoring Coalition watersheds. You can filter by counties, regional boards, so on. So I'm going to pick regional boards just to pick on them because we're at the water boards here. I'm going to pick, let's see, Santa Ana region. Okay, and then I'm going to pick this site. I forget which site I was on, but now these relative details are filtered by this region that you've selected. Because maybe you don't want to compare it to the entire region, maybe you want to compare your scores to what's going on in your region of interest. So just another layer of detail that you can pull out from this. So that's the SQI in a nutshell. As I said yesterday, this is it's a brand new tool. We just finished it yesterday. We're sort of testing the waters now to sort of get it out there and see how people might want to use it to help them manage these sites and use this as a tool to support that. And one final plug for Open Science. All of this source code is available on GitHub, so you can have this in your home and modify it at your leisure. So with that, thank you.
All right, thank you, Marcus, and thank you, everyone. Can we give another hand of applause for all of our contributors here? And thank you, everyone, for sticking it out to the very end. I think right now I think we have time for some questions. So we can open it up, questions for any of the panelists here, or any questions about data science, data visualization in general.
Great talks, appreciate it. And again, thanks for you sticking around too. I guess I'll preface my statement by, the governor has indicated that clean, high-quality water is a human right. And, our expectation is another 5 million people in less than 10 years. So I was curious, as we go through these outreach tools, how is that increased population considered in what you look at for potential water quality, water supply? The interesting last talk, do we have population by township or something like that geospaced in to maybe indicate some of the stressors as well? So I guess that's my comment is a lot of good talks today, a lot of good outreach, but we're going to have a lot more people, and I don't see us going backward to the kumbaya days of upper river flows and stuff. So how do we get ready for the next 10 years?
Does anyone want to try to tackle that? Well, I can say one thing, which is I know that as demonstrated by some of the data visualizations here and a lot of the talks within our organization, there is definitely a recognition that in the future, even now, we'll need to start integrating a lot more different data sets. So we'll have to bring in that demographic data. And I know with the California Department of Finance, I believe, does some population kind of predictions. I don't know how far out, but something like that is something that we could use, bring in other algorithms, models, and try to predict that way and try to target and prioritize program actions based on that way. But for sure, there's definitely a need to do more data integration and working with not just water quality data, but bringing in a whole bunch of other different data sets. So I don't know if anybody wants to add to that. Bryn?
We track land use in the Stream Pollution Trends program, and just in the last 10 years, there's a land use database that gets updated every 5 years, and we see the writing on the wall with increased use of urban pesticides, residential use pesticides, the people that have their roaches sprayed every month, whether they're there or not, and water their lawns. And so a lot of this stuff is, we know the trajectory, I think. And I think if you're adding population to that, you're going to add urbanized area and you're going to just increase that pattern. So I don't know if it's communicating it to the people, to the decision makers. We know that that's happening, and one of the jobs that I find difficult as a university researcher is to communicate that to the managers at the water boards to take it to the next step, whether it's a regulatory action. We talked about, somebody mentioned pursuing hotspot, of a place that's clearly impacted. We've been monitoring similar hotspots for 15 years at my lab, and sometimes there's action and sometimes there's not. So it's a decision maker thing, I think, more than a data conveyance.
Yeah, and this is Greg, voice from behind the panel, sorry. I'll just support everything that was said and mention that a lot of tools are waiting to be built. They just need permission and resources and a directive if somebody's going to use a tool. So there's a lot of discussion amongst the different groups I'm in about predicting where the people will go or what's going to be needed to protect the resources, riparian zone, buffer. A lot of the discussions you heard today about fish and water resource management, I know there's consideration into how to prevent as much future harm as possible. But land use planning and everything, governing that kind of topic in California is really complicated. So it would take someone making the decision that they're going to use the tool and then request it. So Ali points out that the Healthy Watershed Partnership has a integrated assessment tool that also integrates population. But I think it's way more than just population. It's also just these other demographic data sets that are going to be really important to start integrating into our decision tools. Again, though, there's an infinite amount of tools. I tell people upstairs all the time of, we could build probably any tool that they want as long as they give us clear instructions on how they want to use it and resources to build it. It's getting easier, though. As you've seen, one of the demonstrations of this year's status report is really the facility at which staff and other people are gaining the ability to build these tools and to integrate data. And a lot of that is the data itself is becoming more available, but a lot of it is also just the technology and the knowledge and skills of the people, that you guys out there, all of you. So I would not be surprised if next year we saw more of these talks that had integrated data sets that were not related to water at all.
Speaking of the integrated data sets, what's the chance of having all these indices just on one map? We got the groundwater and stream quality index, and is it just too much data, or is there kind of a simplified version you guys could integrate so that for the general public and others, they can, instead of clicking around to the various sites, you have one portal?
I'll take a stab at that again, unless, I mean, the index conversation is really interesting. There's more and more of them coming. There's a lot already. The real challenge is to doing what you said. It's not so much the data and the architecture and the technology. It's more about what's the purpose. Why would you want to have the the water quality index looking at that exceedance and magnitude kind of a thing next to something that might look at benthic community diversity or whatever. So as long as there was a rational reason, I think we're going to again see more and more of these options of people can flip indexes on and off. The underlying data sets, one of the really interesting things too is we're getting more expanded, it's not convergence, but we're getting more and more tools that are using the same data sets to do an index here and an index there, and pretty soon we're going to be building off of common architecture. So it's just a matter of at some point it gets too big and there's too much information to make it useful as a tool. But I do think the technology side is getting more nimble at allowing the kinds of what-if scenarios to all run and operate out of the same environment where the data is in one architecture and the scripting and the algorithms are available if you know how to use them. But this is kind of a power user group in this audience right here. We also have to interface a lot of times with people who have no sense of, they don't want a lot of knobs and dials and widgets. They really just kind of want to have somebody answer a use case question or something.
So I have just one follow-up comment to you. Your comment hits me at my core because if you saw my talk yesterday, I was kind of bashing on the old way to deliver scientific products as reports. That's, as scientists, that's how we're trained to do things. And I said, well, reports that's the old school way. Now we can use dashboards and sort of really reach a bigger audience. But the more I am sort of involved in this business of creating dashboards, I'm starting to, I see a lot of examples where I feel like the dashboard is the new report. There's more and more dashboards coming out, and it's just like, who cares? I mean, how relevant is that to what I'm doing? And the point about, do we have an index on top of another index and several other indices? I mean, I understand that completely. Why would you want to do that? And I think I say this more as a cautionary tale to this group, that when we create these things, I think it's the burden on us is to think about who and why are we creating it, and who are we going to work with to deliver what we need for them. I mean, don't just create something in isolation. Work with the people that need it, and don't just do it for yourself because it's fun to work with data. You're just a means to an end, and your product will have a greater impact if it's serving some purpose. So that's all I just want to make that, I put that out there to think about that, and not just make more dashboards. So.
I think there might be a simple way to go about that, and thinking about trying to have indices for each of these different areas that's sort of conveying the status is like, it's way too complicated. But maybe just having a portal to, if you click on a water body, you can find out what data sets are available or what indices are available for that water body, and then you can dig deeper into the ones of interest. So maybe doing it that way where it's not trying to convey the information on the first level, but just saying that there are data and that you can dig there and get more information.
I'll add too, it's Nick Martirano at the back of the back, that the Healthy Watersheds Partnership, we're working, our Sea Grant fellow Anna Holder, who's helped build this event as much as anybody, is working on revamping that portal, that area, to use a conceptual framework to get the user to ask themselves questions to figure out what they're trying to answer, and then to help point them to existing tools and provide that as kind of a resource library. And then if you can't find a tool that's helping you answer your question, then you would initiate working with that work group to help maybe build you something that would help you address those management questions. So that idea is a great one, and we're trying to address that by helping the user figure out what they're trying to answer and then point them to the resource that maybe exist, these tools and then others.
I had a question about the talk about the fish. So there was an infographic that you said was pretty extensively focus grouped, and that seems pretty great and like something we should probably do more of. So I was wondering, can you talk a little bit more about how that worked, and is that feasible to do on more our kind of key public facing graphics like that?
Sure. The part, the focus group testing that I'm aware of goes back to something that came up earlier today when I was kind of reacquainting myself with LaDonna Williams, who, in talking about this project that was 2005 to 2007, the Fish Mercury project. And it was that project that I was mainly referring to, where we worked with a lot of community groups. We were partnering with the Department of Public Health on that, and they have done a lot of work on risk communication. There was a woman named Alicia Wenzel, who's now retired, who had great relationships with a lot of these local community groups. And one of the neat things we did in that project was we funded a lot of these community groups with small grants to do risk communication in their communities. So we had them strongly engaged in this project, and so they through them we had access to a variety of different communities and people that we could draw on to be focus groups to test out different ways of designing that poster. I think there's been more work like that since that time that I haven't really been involved with, so I don't know much about it. But I think that this poster is a result of a long process of a lot of people thinking about the design and actually doing the testing with audiences to make sure that it works. So I definitely think that if you want to have successful communication, and it's really part of all the monitoring programs that we're trying to collect monitoring data and communicate information. You need to basically monitor how well you're communicating, and I think things like focus groups are important for that.
Oh, I just had a question for David. For that Canadian Water Quality Index formula, what is the scope and amplitude? How do you get those F values? What does that mean?
All right. So essentially, it's taking all of the monitoring data, and hopefully we can pull up the formulas for that. But it's not quite as complicated as it looks. It's really just for every sample, it's looking at the threshold value for that given sample, which were defined on that other tab that I showed earlier. So then it's just it's summing up all of the number of times that samples exceeded the thresholds, and then also for the magnitude, looking at just exactly how much did it exceed the threshold by, so you can kind of see the formulas there. Not sure if that totally explains.
The scope value, what was that?
What do you mean exactly by scope?
Well, it said that F1 plus F2 plus F3 divided by 1.73, and it said scope was one of the F values. You see, so what is scope exactly?
I'm not sure that that's... there's only two F values in this one. F1 is frequency and F2 is magnitude. So then it's the overall index is 100 minus square root of F1 frequency squared plus magnitude squared.
Might have been a typo, might have meant score.
Maybe.
Well,
Sorry about that.
we're going to end on a typo. So, and that, there's a lesson there, right? We make mistakes, we iterate, we keep trying, and this has been an amazing symposium, so I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the panel that was up here in particular, because the work that went into this was a year of work, not just getting ready to write a thing. So thank you, everyone.